Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Sustainability and Resilience in the Community, Part 2, Food Systems. I'm Matt Reese, GreenGov Council Deputy Director. Today's webinar is co-hosted and supported through our partnership with the Penn State Sustainability Institute. The GreenGov Council was established through Executive Order 2019-01, which requires Commonwealth agencies to lead by example, promoting energy conservation and sustainable governance. The executive order sets forth goals for the Commonwealth, including the goal of achieving a 26% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2025 and an 80% reduction by 2050. The executive order created additional goals for agencies focusing on fleet electrification, high performance buildings, annual energy reductions, and use of renewable electricity. Visit our website at dgs.pa.greengov/greengov to see how agencies are meeting these performance goals. You'll find a host of information on the website, including completed agency certification checklists for the past 4 years, past annual reports for the past 3 years, and then we are anticipating our 2022 annual report, which is scheduled for publication early February. GreenGov news and sign-up opportunities such as the GreenGov quarterly newsletter and this future webinar series will also be hosted on the GreenGov website. Now I'd like to introduce our friend, colleague, and partner at the Penn State Sustainability Institute, Peter Boger, PhD. Peter is the Assistant Director for Community Engagement at the Penn State University Sustainability Institute and responsible for developing strategic programming and partnerships such as this one with the GreenGov Council that help Penn State leverage its resources to promote sustainability throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. It's hard for us to believe. We were just talking earlier this week to realize that we are now in our 4th year of partnership with the GreenGov Council, and that has gone surprisingly fast, but I think it's gone fast because of how great the partnership has been and how much we have valued our opportunity to work with Matt and Mark and with all the state agencies. Penn State wants to serve as a land-grant institution in partnership and in service with the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And one of the things we emphasize in our work at Penn State is that we can't do sustainability for all the 130,000 faculty, staff, and students across 24 institutions. We are a small team now down to 9 in the Sustainability Institute, but it is our job to convene and to catalyze and to help communicate ideas of sustainability across the Penn State system and across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And in that, we share a common mission with the GreenGov Council, because as amazing as Matt and Mark are, they are 2 people and can't do sustainability for all of the Commonwealth government. But their job as well is to convene and catalyze. And that's what today is all about, is convening people for important conversations about sustainability. And so we are grateful for this partnership and grateful that you all are joining us once again today. And to get right into today, because we have an amazing presentation, and this is one we know food systems are incredibly important across all aspects of sustainability and seem to be one that really brings out a lot of interest and a lot of participation from our audience. So we're incredibly honored to have our presenters today, Caryn Long Earl and Tom Mainzer. Caryn Long Earl was appointed Director of the Bureau of Food Assistance for the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture in May 2017. She has oversight of several multi-million-dollar state and federal food assistance programs and serves as the co-lead of the Northeastern Association of State Departments of Agriculture Subcommittee on Food and Nutrition Policy and as the departmental representative on the state's Emergency Food Assistance Advisory Committee. Prior to joining the department, Caryn spent more than a decade working on policy issues related to food safety and food security, including at the USDA and as a Congressional Agricultural Fellow in the U.S. Senate, and as a Senior Policy Advisor in Feeding America's Washington, D.C. office. She served for 3 years as Executive Director of Feeding Pennsylvania before coming to work for the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. Tom Mainzer has served as Director of Agricultural Partnerships for Feeding Pennsylvania since June 2020. He is responsible for developing agricultural programs and relationships, as well as managing the Pennsylvania Agricultural Surplus System Program and the USDA Farm to Food Bank Program. In 2020, he also managed the CARES Pass program, using nearly $10 million of funding to procure and distribute over 6 million pounds of Pennsylvania food products through Pennsylvania's food bank network. Prior to joining Feeding PA, Tom worked with the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture as the Agricultural Trade Specialist, assisting the Commonwealth's food and agricultural producers and processors in pursuing export sales and international business opportunities. And with resumes like that, you know these are the experts to come to when we want to talk about food systems and sustainability in Pennsylvania. So thank you, Caryn and Tom, so much, and take it away.
All right, thank you so much. The amusing part you may have noted in there was that I left Feeding Pennsylvania to come to the Department of Agriculture, and Tom left the Department of Agriculture to go to Feeding Pennsylvania. So we're sort of living parallel lives here. Tom, are you sharing the presentation? Okay, I don't see it up yet. Is that just me? Okay, there we go. So Tom and I are going to talk a little bit about the food systems and the current state of things here in Pennsylvania. If you want to go to the next slide, Tom. So at the Department of Agriculture's Bureau of Food Assistance, as was mentioned, we administer several multi-million-dollar federal and state food assistance programs. In the federal sphere, we administer the Emergency Food Assistance Program, which is essentially the federal commodities that come in from USDA and are distributed to all 67 counties through the charitable food system out to low-income clients. We also administer the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, which basically is a senior food box. It provides a nourishing monthly food box to low-income seniors in all 67 counties. We also serve as the conduit to more than 800 school systems in Pennsylvania to provide USDA foods to their school meal programs, also after-school programs and summer programs. And we administer the WIC and Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program, which provides WIC recipients and low-income seniors with $24 worth of vouchers that are good for redemption at participating farmers markets. And we limit in Pennsylvania the purchase of products to products exclusively grown by Pennsylvania farmers in Pennsylvania. We also administer two large state programs, the State Food Purchase Program, which is one of the largest of its kind in the nation. It's currently funded at approximately $20 million. Those are grant funds that go out to all 67 counties to supplement the foods that come in from USDA so that counties can purchase additional food items for distribution to low-income Pennsylvanians. And then our newest program is the Pennsylvania Agricultural Surplus System, or PASS. And Tom's going to talk about that one a little bit later, but essentially the idea behind the PASS program is that we know that there is a lot of surplus agricultural production that may not be harvested or may not be distributed because it may not be of ideal quality to go into, a grocery store or restaurant, but perfectly safe and healthy. And so we work to provide farmers with their cost to produce the product. And we get that product, keep it out of the landfills and distribute it to low-income Pennsylvanians. And we actually contract with Feeding Pennsylvania to administer that program. Next slide, Tom. So a little bit about hunger in Pennsylvania. I've provided you with two pieces of information, and at first glance, they sort of look like they're sort of opposing pieces of information. The first piece is data that comes from Feeding America's annual Map the Meal Gap report. This is the data pulled out for Pennsylvania from 2015 through 2020. And the data from 2020 is the most recently available data that they have released. That was released last spring. What you can see from here is that the number of Pennsylvanians who are food insecure has actually decreased every year since 2015. And it may seem counterintuitive knowing that, when the pandemic hit, there were so many people in need of food assistance. But what this data really measures is the number of people who don't know where their next meal is coming from. And thanks to a large infusion of funding, creation of some new programs, the food safety net has done what it is supposed to do, and it has been there to provide food assistance to low-income Pennsylvanians. So While the need may have increased, the number of people who are truly experiencing hunger has significantly decreased across Pennsylvania. The other piece of data is data that we collect monthly and started at the beginning of the pandemic that shows duplicated numbers of the numbers of people who are served by our county food banks, by their lead agencies, so their local food pantries, soup kitchen shelters. And it just shows the sheer numbers of people who have been coming to those sites for assistance. So it really shows the need has continued to be out there, but by and large, we are stepping up to the response to the need. I did want to note, however, that despite the reductions that we have seen in food insecurity levels, there are still some communities who continue to be disproportionately impacted. And those communities include households with children, as well as BIPOC households. So particularly households with Black or Latino individuals. Next slide, Tom. So this slide shows the data from Feeding America's Map the Meal Gap. And it just shows a deeper dive, a breakdown of county information. And if you actually want to see a deeper dive of some of this information, it's accessible on Feeding America's website. Just search for Map the Meal Gap. It's an interactive map where you can actually see specific numbers for each county. So the lighter green counties are the counties that have lower numbers of food insecurity. The darker counties obviously have higher numbers. And I can tell you specifically that the two counties with the highest levels of food insecurity are not surprisingly Philadelphia County in the southeast, but then Fayette County in the southwest. Those two are always at the top of the list. But if you're interested in seeing specific information about your county, you can see that map. They also do a breakdown of the data between the general population and by children. Next slide, Tom. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the effects of the pandemic. For the charitable feeding system, the pandemic was really a perfect storm. We saw dramatically increased need for food assistance right away from the very beginning. You may have seen on the national news lines of cars just waiting for food outside of the food bank in Pittsburgh. We saw that replicated all throughout the state. We were also impacted by disruptions to the supply chain. We quickly had to pivot from, there was a lot of food production for food in restaurants. People weren't eating out. So, the production methods had to change to producing household products. It was harder for the grocery stores to get access to household products, even harder for us in the charitable feeding system to get access to those products. There was also issues with getting access to packaging for food products. And then we have continued to see this since the pandemic, and particularly over the last year with inflation, decreased levels of food donations, and also decreased government commodities, because as food prices go higher, it's harder for the government to be able to acquire some of the products that we need. Obviously, continue to be ongoing supply chain disruptions. We've seen labor shortages in the food supply chain production, but particularly with truck driver shortages. There are less drivers available, and so it's harder to get the product and more expensive. And then, all of this feeds into the food price inflation that's taking a significant toll on the households that we serve, and also on the food banks, who are both seeing increased prices for the foods that they're looking to purchase. Next slide, Tom. So as overall inflation has begun to taper off, food price inflation has continued to remain incredibly high. USDA's Economic Research Service showed a nearly 10% increase in the cost of at-home food between 2021 and 2022. And the cost of goods that the food banks are generally looking to purchase, as well as USDA, quite frankly, has gone dramatically higher. I think, one of the, two of the products that I would really point to, and they're two of the things that we generally try to acquire with some of our state food dollars, with our past dollars, and are some of the healthy, nutritious products that the food banks are looking to acquire. Fruits and vegetables, the cost of those is up by nearly 10%. And then milk and other dairy products is up an astounding 16.4%. So the effects of the pandemic have really taken a toll on food price inflation, and they've taken a toll on the charitable feeding system and the availability of food that we are able to get. So next slide, I think this is yours, Tom.
Yes. All right, Caryn, thank you. And again, Tom Mainzer, I'm Director of Ag Partnerships with Feeding Pennsylvania. So just a background on Feeding PA, we are the state association of Feeding America food banks. We have 9 Feeding America food banks across the Commonwealth, and they serve all 67 counties. And they have 27 partner agencies, or 2,700 agencies, such as food pantries, soup kitchens, YMCAs, mobile distributions, that reach all corners of the Commonwealth. Our programs, Fill a Glass with Hope, that is donations from organizations that's distributed among our food banks for fluid milk. The Mid-Atlantic Regional Cooperative is housed in the Philadelphia wholesale produce market. They source produce from all around the world, domestic and international, and they sell exclusively to food banks both in PA and in the area from Virginia up to Maine. Our Healthy Pantry initiative works with nutrition educators to educate clients at food banks and food pantries on health options. We have a new data analysis manager that's working to better understand clients that are served and how we can better serve those across the food bank network. And then my program is agricultural partnerships. So I work closely with Caryn and her office on state and federal programs that are used to source more local Pennsylvania products for our food banks and food pantries. And the PA Ag Surplus System PASS was first funded in 2015, and over the past 7 years, more than 25 million pounds of Pennsylvania food products have been distributed in all 67 counties. 1/3 of those pounds were distributed during kind of the peak COVID response from July 20 to June 21. We've worked with over 200 farms, processors, and growers, and we're trying to get producers from all 67 counties, and we're on our way there with 53 so far. And generally, PASS focuses on healthy, nutrient-dense products: fruits, vegetables, potatoes, various dairy products, fluid milk, cheese, yogurt, butter, variety of meat products, poultry, pork, beef, eggs, and other local items. We work with some processed products, but they have to have PA ingredients such as canned tomatoes, tomato sauce, and a small amount of canned goods. As Caryn mentioned earlier, I started in July of 2020 with Feeding PA, so right during the peak COVID pandemic. So I've learned my job at first during COVID, and then I had to relearn it again later once things have been settling down. But during that initial response in the spring and summer of 2020, the food banks saw an increase of 20% of the people they served. 5% of Pennsylvanians had just become food insecure. And as you can see, just in the first 3 months of the COVID response, we went up by 250% of those that are served for the whole year. So it was finding foods that we could easily distribute, keeping both clients, volunteers, food bank workers safe, keeping the food safe, and keeping costs reasonable. So everyone had to pivot, and it was a lot of learning on the fly for sure. And for the food banks and the food pantries, we work with, we focus mostly on retail packaged goods. So 3-pound bags of potatoes, 5-pound bags of potatoes, dozen cartons of eggs, half gallons and gallons of milk, 1 or 2-pound packages of ground beef. So when we were getting calls from restaurants that would have flats of eggs at 30 eggs to a flat, or pallets of potatoes that were 2,000 pounds or 50-pound bags that would usually go to restaurants, it was hard to pivot. And sometimes we had to turn those down because we didn't have the volunteers to go through that. So trying to work with state officials, I know the eggs did eventually get approved for 30-pound flats, but sometimes there was food available that we just couldn't use due to regulations or keeping products safe. So we had to find ways around, working with packaging suppliers, focusing like on eggs, getting those dozen packages so that they could be repacked. And a lot of it was food service. When the restaurants shut down, they had product available. Some restaurants, I'm sure you're aware, pivoted and started making meals that were distributed. We did a little bit of that. And then as things loosened up, getting rid of their inventory so it didn't go bad. The big impact of COVID, as you can see on there, is the box model, that right-hand photo, where we would go from what's called choice. So clients would go into a food pantry and they can pick and choose which fruits and vegetables they may want, where we, during COVID, were mixing them and doing boxes. So a mix of produce, fruits and vegetables, or a mix of meat products, or a mix of dairy products like milk, cheese, butter, yogurt. And those were easy that people didn't even need to get out of their car. They could drive through, pop their trunk, and volunteers or workers could put product right in their car, and they could drive off, keeping social distancing, keeping everyone safe. So the box model was worked on before the pandemic, but it really became crucial to the response. During the initial COVID response, we did get an additional $10 million infused from CARES Act funding. CARES Act is Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act funds. So over 6 months, we spent $10 million on dairy, and then $5 million on dairy and $5 million on produce, protein, eggs, and some processed foods. To put that in perspective, our normal annual allotment at that time was $1.5 million. We did $10 million in 6 months. We were even able to transfer back some of our administrative funding to purchase more food. And a lot of that went to produce boxes that were, again, for these dollars, we had to use all Pennsylvania product. So a lot of PA produce boxes, mixed dairy boxes with eggs, with cheese, butter, yogurt. We did some ground meat, eggs. We did some canned goods and applesauce. All in all, we worked with 32 vendors from 21 counties, and we did over 6.1 million pounds of food. So a lot of that was the boxes to help with ease of distribution. We made those purchases in 6 months, and then they were distributed from July, and they did carry on through roughly April of 21. So fortunately, those extra funds were able to service the food banks for approximately 8 or 9 months. I found this Environmental Protection Agency report on From Farm to Kitchen the environmental impacts on food waste. And I'm sure we all know the statistics. Roughly 1/3 of the food supply is wasted. Comes out to approximately 1,200 calories per person per day, which is almost a whole allotment, recommended allotment for calories. The amount of food waste has tripled since 1960. Restaurants and households are responsible for roughly half of food waste, and most commonly, fruits and vegetables are wasted, followed by dairy and eggs. So, I mean, those stats are put out on a pretty regular basis, and we try to, with our programs and with Caryn's other programs, educate people on how they can use food to reduce waste and utilize as much as they can. So here's a little more detail on where the waste comes from. So the consumption stage is where most people do see a lot of waste. They might not finish their meal, they might not save their leftovers, and they dispose of their extra food, which is a shame considering how many people are hungry. But for primary production for the PASS program, it's one of the primary goals of the PASS program is reducing waste, taking product that might not have met specs for a grocery store. Maybe the apples weren't red enough or they were too big. And then, there's still nutrient dense, there's still fine or ugly produce is having its moment. Taking that ugly produce and distributing it out through the food banks, making sure it doesn't go to waste or get plowed under, but instead getting to people that need it and that could use it. So we work with number twos, excess, surplus, and finding a fair price. These farms are businesses, so covering their costs and helping their business, but then also allowing the food banks to service as many people as possible. On the distribution and processing side, we're trying to work on strategies to extend the shelf life of products. We take apples that don't make the grade for retail fresh, and processors use them for applesauce, apple juice, apple cider that gets distributed. We're trying to work with some processors to take excess or surplus product to make more jarred or canned or frozen products. There's a lot of jellies out there, but we want to do more nutrient dense products for the food banks. There's a place in the world for desserts and jellies and condiments, but we also want to deliver nutritious foods, nutritious local foods to our clients as well. So we're always trying to find ways to extend shelf life. And then dairy is another example on the distribution and processing. There was always, during the COVID response, stories of milk getting dumped. So if we could hear about that and find it beforehand, we would try to divert that product to a processor, and perhaps it would get made into cheese. So we could help cover the cost of the milk, use it to make cheese, and then get that out to our food bank network. Also, when yogurt was made, there'd be extra cream left over, and we don't want to see the cream go to waste, so we would get that and have that made into butter. So always trying to reduce waste, utilize the whole product, and still try to get product out to those we serve. On the retail side, our food banks do retail rescue, working with groceries and other vendors to save product, a lot of fresh produce, baked goods, shelf-stable goods like cereals, granolas, canned goods. And they work and maintain those relationships with retail outlets on a regular basis, regular pickups or coordinated deliveries. And the challenge is getting store staff to maintain that relationship. Sometimes there's turnover. So educating workers on, produce that might still have enough life to be distributed through the food banks at the same time. The food banks don't want waste because it does cost money to dispose of product that's just too far gone and can't be distributed. The consumption side is one where we'd still have to do work. That's a little bit outside the scope of the food bank, but educating individuals on the best by date. It's still, some products are still healthy to consume. Maybe they don't have the peak taste or the peak flavor, but it doesn't mean they're not safe any longer. They might not need to be disposed of. So on the consumption side, there's a lot of education that can be done. Maybe product is overly ripe, so instead of throwing away bananas, you make banana bread or something. So that would be more of education for our clients that we serve. So we are trying to do our best to reduce food waste and work with producers, food banks, grocers, retailers, and the clients we serve to get the most out of the products that we work with. And in summary, I'll pass this back to Caryn, but there is a new Pennsylvania Food Policy Council, which will be housed in the Bureau of Food Assistance at the PA Department of Agriculture.
Yeah, but before I talk about that, I actually just kind of wanted to address, so this was sort of in the vein of talking about, so what's next? And one of the things I did want to address that is next, during the pandemic, USDA had done these food boxes that were known as the Farmers to Families Food Box Program. And it was a response to, having farmers who had contracts with commercial businesses and had no outlet for sales for this product. And USDA was trying to purchase this product, put it into food boxes and distribute it out to, low-income Americans. It was a well-intentioned program, but they ran into a lot of issues with it. And so USDA stepped back from that program and has now announced cooperative agreement programs. There's the Local Foods Procurement Agreement Program, LFPA, which we will also be partnering with Feeding Pennsylvania on to administer. And that program has 2 rounds to it. The first round is approximately $15 million. The second round, I believe, will be around $14 million. We are planning to do with that, much like we've done with PASS, to go out and purchase product from Pennsylvania producers. It's the idea is the same, to help support Pennsylvania agriculture and to help get that food into the hands of low-income Pennsylvanians. The benefit of this program versus the initial effort that USDA tried is that all of those dollars are going to be used to support local production, and it's going to be done locally. So it's going to significantly reduce the carbon footprint from production to distribution. There's a similar program that we have just been awarded funding for, called the Local Foods for Schools Procurement Agreement. And we will be announcing that soon for how schools can apply to get some of that funding. But it's basically funding for farm to school, where schools will be able to get additional local products. So, again, it's going to be helpful in supporting our food system here in Pennsylvania and within the local states. And it's going to, again, help to reduce our carbon footprint. And we're really excited about that. And I think it also dovetails nicely with our farmland preservation program that we have in Pennsylvania, which is, again, one of the leading programs in the country to help invest in preserving farmland to, maintain land that is not only producing food, but, is land where, you're not having additional development on. And then, yes, to the Pennsylvania Food Policy Council, this is something that was in the works before the pandemic hit and kind of took a back seat. But Governor Wolf announced this in December, that we are going to have a Pennsylvania Food Policy Council. And I'm really excited about this. It's taking the place of the Governor's Food Security Partnership. So a lot of it is aimed at looking at food security and nutrition, and also reducing food waste. But really, it's going to take a larger look at the whole food system and addressing challenges in the food system and supporting food sovereignty. So haven't hired a director for it yet, and haven't really gotten it off the ground too much, but really excited to have this. So many other states have food policy councils, and Pennsylvania has been lagging behind in that. So this is a really great opportunity for us. And I will also add that this is something that Secretary Redding here at the Department of Agriculture has been championing for the last few years. So it's fortuitous for us that Governor-elect Shapiro has nominated him to serve another 4 years as Secretary of Agriculture. So I guarantee we will have support in the cabinet to move this initiative forward. So with that, I think Tom and I wrapping up. I don't know if Tom, if you just want to share the last slide with our contact information, and we are happy to take questions.
Well, thanks so much for the fantastic presentation, and I will go ahead and stop the recording now.